In the 17th century, the Dutch were making a vast amount of money, not only because of our spice trades with Indonesia, but also because of the slave trade. The Dutch sailors would leave the Netherlands, sail to the western shores of Africa and buy slaves. Then they sailed to the Caribbean, sold the slaves and filled the ships with salt, tobacco and other goods. Then back across the Atlantic to Amsterdam. There the ships were unloaded and the goods were stored in the very characteristic warehouses of Amsterdam that so many tourists enjoy today. I think it's important to sometimes look around and realize that your heritage is built on the backs of the poor souls getting sold into slavery. If you realize that sometimes and think about that, I think it makes you a better person. The Dutch also dominated the eastern trade route in the 17th century. You might think that odd that the ships would sail to Australia and not directly to Indonesia, but ships would round the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa. They didn't want to run into the Spanish or the Portuguese, who saw the Dutch as their enemies. Also, the Dutch could take advantage of more favorable winds out of the west. So they started crossing the Indian Ocean on a more southern route. On seeing the Australian coast, the ships would alter their course to north-northeast towards Indonesia. That is why the Dutch, who found Australia in 1602, left such a mark on Western Australia. We have this man to thank for the beautiful replica of the Batavia, Willem Vos and his son Jan. Willem saw his trade of building wooden ships perish and came up with the idea to build this replica. Nobody really wanted to sponsor him in the beginning except the mayor of Lelystad. Lelystad was a fairly new city at the time, because the Dutch made land from sea in the 50s, creating the province of Flevoland. If you want to know more about that, then let me know, because that's a whole other topic I could fill an entire video with. Lelystad had some big city issues, one of which was a very high unemployment rate among young people. Because they had no work, they were responsible for all sorts of trouble. So the mayor gave him a field near the water to work on and some troubled kids. A local builder sponsored a sea container to sit in and have coffee breaks. Willem sold his business and started with about 4,000 euros in today's money. That's about 6,000 Australian and about 4,400 American dollars. Willem had a friend who was willing to deliver the wood needed on credit. Although Willem didn't know when he could pay for the wood, he wasn't the man to make concessions. He ordered the same wood that the original Batavia was built from, pine wood from Germany's dark forest. Willem's skills to handle and lead troubled kids was a big part of his success. Everybody felt it was their ship, not so much only Willem's project. Though he kept a strong hold on his idea that it needed to be made all original. From the cannons to the nails, it all needed to be the same craftwork that it was in the 17th century. They soldiered on for 10 years. And in 1995 the build was finished. The Batavia had some intrigues going on during the voyage. The skipper and the second merchant didn't get along with the chief merchant. They even went so far as to order a sexual assault on one of the female passengers, hoping that the chief merchant would punish the whole crew. The skipper and the second merchant planned to use the outrage to start a mutiny. But because the chief merchant was sick in his bunk, he didn't give any orders. Some people believe that the skipper ran into the reef on purpose to create another crisis situation to start a mutiny. We will never know for sure, because the statements from the time were obtained by torturing the mutineers, so they are probably not very reliable. When the ship wrecked, the chief merchant and the skipper set off to Indonesia to get help. They left the second merchant, called Hieronymus Corneliszoon, and about 200 souls on the islands of the Abrolhos. Now Cornelis started his mutiny and ordered the death of everyone who was against him. A paranoia-fed series of frantic murders on men, women and children took place. When the chief merchant returned after 3 months, he found about 30 survivors. He thought it very strange and started an investigation. Eventually, the perpetrators were tortured and hanged for their crimes. Perhaps that is why the story of the Batavia is so well known. It's a story of intrigue, conflicting interests, and extreme violence. And because the Dutch people understood that it was important for the trade that most people would know how to read and write one language, there are a lot of official documents left that tell this story. By now, corporate companies were involved with money and ideas, and that is how the Batavia ended up in Australia. It was put on a dock ship and transported to Sydney Harbour. It was the Australians that put their heads together and their money and convinced Willem that the Batavia should sail these waters on her own steam. People were outraged and thought it reckless and irresponsible to take such a risk. Secretly, Willem thought that too, but said, "Sometimes you have to go along the edge of the abyss to be successful." So the Batavia was pulled out of the safety of the harbour and the sails were hoisted. The Batavia rocked violently from side to side going through the breakwaters. The top of the mast swept from side to side over more than 20 meters. But after clearing the breakwaters, the Batavia found her course and sailed on her own steam. I'm glad I went to visit the Batavia, because what I found was not the glamorous ship I remember from my childhood. Instead, I found an old and tired lady. The Batavia is currently undergoing a massive restoration. The shipyard partnered up with a school that trains young people in the art of woodwork, painting, metallurgy, sailmaking, rig making and line making. There is even a brewery on site that makes beer like they did in the 17th century. But all these people are taking a big risk with their investments, because whilst I'm writing this, the future of the Batavia is all but certain. The plan is to hoist her out of the water for good and put her on the land next to the yard where she was built. The last couple of years, an entire city arose around the shipyard, with stores, restaurants and a museum. The plan is to put the Batavia next to the museum and build a glass house around her. That is the only way she can be preserved for future generations. Her years in the water after her Australian adventure has not done her good. They want to lift her out of the water by November 2022. They hope to have the funds for it by June 2022. But as it stands, they are not even close to the €1,000,000 they need to put the Batavia on dry land. I spend a long day at the shipyard talking to kids who get an education and work experience there, I talked to a carpenter who got his education there in the 80s, helped build the ship, and is still working there now, renovating her. And I talked to a man who is now a guide for school children and visitors, but originally was one of the riggers. They are all very worried about the future of the Batavia. If you like to check out what they're planning, I have put a link to the website in the description of this video.